Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
We're into February 2022. What is happening with the two of you?
Everybody's, trucking through February, and I continue to be amazed that I feel like I've said this so many times here, but I continue to be amazed that like a year ago I couldn't get off of a couch. So praise God that like I can now. So that's pretty amazing to me, honestly.
Praise God. Praise God.
That's really good.
RJ, what I know that you've been on a little trip with some friends of ours.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of
had an amazing clergy retreat with about 7 close friends who are all rectors of churches around the country, and we're all in our 40s and have families and share similar convictions, and we just enjoy each other's company.
I heard that
Sarah,
both hosts of the Same Old Song were there.
They were. Yes, Aaron was there, and Jake was there, and Sarah's amazing husband Josh was there, and your brother was there, and we just prayed for each other and shared what's going on in our lives, and it was just a really genuine and wonderful time. And this is a crazy life that we've signed up for. So it's nice to be supported and have other people who are going through it as well. And then I will say also, Dave, because this is the last episode I think that will come out before I see you face to face, that I'm so excited for you to come to West Palm Beach. The weekend of Saturday, February 26th and 27th.
So there's an event where
I can't wait for you to come down here.
I'm speaking about seculosity on a Saturday night, and then preaching and teaching at the church on Sunday.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
so Holy Trinity Episcopal, Saturday, 5 p.m. It's holytrinitywpb.org is our church website, and you can go there for information on the talk, or you can just show up at 5 p.m. on Saturday, February 26th.
And you can see me give RJ
really fun.
this very cool gift that I got him in Tulsa, where we saw, I mentioned last time, I went to Leon Russell's church studio, which is a converted church. And Leon Russell in the early 70s was the sort of maestro or band leader for the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour, which is an enormous tour that Joe Cocker did. And he wore this funny baseball T-shirt the entire time that said Holy Trinity on it. I'm sure there's a reference to it. It's probably quite profane, but it's RJ saw a picture of it and said, "I've got to get a T-shirt like that." And then I said to him, "You know what? I already got you one."
Oh,
Can't wait. I'm very excited.
They make facsimiles of them and sell them there in beautiful Tulsa, Oklahoma.
that's so cool.
Yeah, well,
Very cool.
we're doing pretty well here in Charlottesville. I am just finishing up the galleys of this book I've been working on for what feels like ages, and yesterday I got to write my acknowledgments, and let's just say the two of you got acknowledged. I won't say if it's in a nice way or... your existence is and presence in my life and is very generously acknowledged. I like to think, because I'm so grateful for the two of you.
I'd like to think we keep your anthropology low just by being who we are. So
Well, actually, the precise acknowledgement is like, thank you for never letting me take myself too seriously. So I think that's his profound spiritual gift that you've given me.
Good.
We're always saying at home, like, the goal is to take the gospel seriously, and by doing that, take yourself a lot less seriously. So that's always the goal.
Well, we're going to start out with I think a great one that sounds kind of flippant at first and then gets really serious. This is Megan O'Geeblin, who we've referenced many times before. Incredible writer, essayist, has got a recent book out. She writes an advice column, like Sarah does. She writes an advice column for Wired magazine. So it's usually technologically related at first. And this is the question that she's responding to. Do good doorbell cams make good neighbors? someone says, a concerned citizen writes, I haven't been burglarized or anything, but I'm feeling some pressure to get one of those Ring surveillance systems for my front porch, the ones that record 24/7 video. Seems smart, but friends are telling me it's a bad look. Would it be unneighborly of me? Am I just an untrustworthy gentrifier? Dear concerned citizen, Megan writes, it seems to me that you're asking not merely whether you should buy one of these systems, but more broadly what it means to be a good neighbor in the age of mass surveillance, gentrification, and police violence. Considering the popularity of community Facebook pages and social platforms like Nextdoor, one might assume that a good neighbor is a kind of detective, a citizen who is willing to sniff out interlopers, collect evidence, and work in conjunction with law enforcement to keep the neighborhood safe. Because many faith traditions teach that we should love our neighbors, that we should love them just as we love ourselves. In the U.S., this tenet has long lived in tension with the virtues of individualism and the sanctity of private property, and has often prompted that tepid good fences make good neighbors wisdom that Benjamin Franklin famously prescribed. Loving your neighbor as yourself, after all, implies that there's also virtue in self-love, and so you could make the case that protecting your property and your own safety falls under that command's umbrella. I will point out, however, that this is not the only way to interpret the spiritual maxim of love thy neighbor as thyself. For quite a different perspective, you might look to Kierkegaard's works of love, one of the most uncompromising meditations on the injunction to love one's neighbor. True love for one's neighbor is a fundamentally disruptive practice that rules out petty questions of ownership. This is Kierkegaard.
So good.
Thieves also disregard the distinction between mine and thine, Kierkegaard points out, and love is the inverse of theft, a willingness to cheerfully surrender what belongs to you for the sake of your brother. If someone steals your coat, you should give them your shirt as well, or to update the analogy, if a porch pirate swipes your Amazon package, throw in your FedEx parcel to boot.
Yes.
To truly love in this way, Kierkegaard argues, it's necessary to abandon the role of a criminal detective, those servants of justice who track down guilt and crime. This is the impulse inherent in each of us to investigate the behavior of others, to unearth their sins, to ferret out clues of potential wrongdoing. Kierkegaard would not have bought into the contemporary self-care motto that well-being, like airplane oxygen masks, is a safeguard that you must secure for yourself before attending to others. In fact, he argued that the command to love one's neighbor as oneself does not entail a moral symmetry, but rather lies on a heightened inequality, as it demands that we spare ourselves the leniency that we must extend to others. It may be virtuous to respond to another's limitations with generosity, but we should not apply the same optimistic outlook towards ourselves. We should not presuppose that we are our best selves, that our motives are entirely pure. Instead, one should practice a vigilant self-doubt and treat oneself as a suspicious character, as he puts it. It is with one's own conscience, in other words, that the procedure of a criminal detective becomes virtuous.
So all I can think, well, I think of several different things.
A lot of Instagram memes of like these cams. I think it's been a real boom for Instagram.
So the first thing that popped into my brain is actually that our neighborhood is full of these Ring doorknob things, and people will take pictures of like if a teenager like does the ding dong ditch thing, you know, where you ring the doorbell and run. Mm-hmm. People will take a picture of that video surveillance and they will post it like in moms groups on Facebook or like on Nextdoor and be like, do you know whose kid this is? Like they woke us up or whatever, which I'm always like, can't kids have fun anymore? I mean, like, this is why they're all depressed, you know, like let them ring your doorbell and run away. Like, chill out. I don't know. And
they
then
can't crank call anymore because of caller ID. Like, what are they supposed to do? Is there anything left?
Yeah. I mean, we know statistically they're not having sex. You know what I mean? Like, just let them ring your doorbell.
They're not getting their driver's licenses.
I know.
You know,
like,
they're very, very stressed out.
This is the only joy they have. So I have that feeling about it. The other thing that comes to mind, and this is literally like a 16-year-old story. So I've probably told it on the podcast, but when Hurricane Katrina hit and I went and lived at a relief camp, Joe Robinson was the Episcopal priest who was running the camp. And at that point, it was a month out from the hurricane. And so there was like just these massive donations. Like think like Nike would pull up with an 18-wheeler and there would just be shoes, right? It would be that kind of like massive scale. And we had this big tent and people could just come and take what they needed. And, you know, interestingly, very strong color lines on the people who are coming and the people who are serving. So mostly people of color who are coming to get things, mostly white people who are coming to volunteer, mostly elderly white people from churches who are coming to volunteer. And the volunteers became very concerned that the people who were coming to take things were taking too much. They were taking more than they needed. It wasn't their size. What are they doing with it? Like everyone was becoming a detective, you know? And I can totally like relate to that need to like know that people are using these things for good. And Joe Robinson got up one night at evening prayer and he said, "We do not care what's happening to the stuff that people are taking. We let them take as much as they want." And I'll never forget this. He said, even if they're taking it and they're selling it on the streets, then they're getting the local economy going. And we love that for them. And I just think of, you know, our need. And I have that need too, to like control and to know it's being used for good and to police people really. It also though, I like the question that comes to mind when I mean, her writing on this is so great, is what is it in ourselves, right? Like that we're trying to keep in check, or like maybe
interrogate yourself.
Yeah. And maybe like if we're interrogating them loudly enough, then we don't have to deal with ourselves. I don't know. It's just, it's
100%.
It's an interesting thing to me, but yeah, I'm very anti like next door, I don't know. I think it keeps us from...
Next door is brutal.
It is. It keeps us
Next
from
door
actually
is
like
just-
knowing
Might be
each
the only thing
other.
worse than Twitter.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Gosh, RJ, that's very insightful.
You
Yeah,
heard it here
because I thought Twitter was the worst, but actually next door worse than Twitter. Yeah,
Because those people you actually know and
Right.
you live near, and they're like looking over your fence in
Right.
your backyard, being like, "What are they doing over
Right.
there?"
Yeah.
Or their fence isn't quite high enough, or it's
Right.
too high.
and they're like, "Here's
or
the
it's just
footage from my
nuts."
doorbell. Look at what's happening." Yeah,
RJ, what do you think here?
Gosh, it brings so many things to mind. The thing about, you know, just being really suspicious of yourself, I think is just very sound advice. It reminds me of David Brooks has kind of been on fire lately. I'm sure you guys saw that long piece he wrote about kind of people trying to save evangelicalism from itself. Did you see that in the New York Times?
Yeah.
But the one before
yeah.
that was about sort of conservatism and about how he still considered himself a conservative. And one of the virtues he said, one of the things that attracted him, that he loved about conservatism, is that one of the tenets is I could be wrong. I could always be wrong. That's just to hold that in the back of your mind. And I don't know where I fall on the spectrum of I'm not here to talk about politics, but that's just a very helpful, very Christian thing also, right? We're sinners. We're selfish. Everything we do is a little bit tainted by fear and self-interest and a desire to control, and just to hold all our actions, our motivations, our desires with a very loose hand, knowing that they probably don't come from a good place. I also, we don't have a ring, but we have an Arlo. You guys know what that is? Which is similar. So it's not the
is that
doorbell,
a dog,
but it is.
or-
It's no. I have
Is that like a bloodhound or?
No, I have two dogs that I don't like, which I've talked about extensively on this podcast. Maisie and Dewey, which anyway, that's neither here nor there. But no, we have this camera system, you know, which is triggered by motion or by sound, which we actually have not set up in Florida because we feel safe. But we bought it in Houston because two things happened. One was some teenagers broke into our house and like stole a bunch of stuff and stole some bikes. And they stole iPhones, which was also a huge mistake. And so I used Find My iPhone to find them, and they got arrested. Although I don't think they ever got tried because the hurricane hit. And now I feel not so great about all that. But my wife felt very unsafe. You know, she came home one day and the front door was wide open and the window was bashed in and there was stuff gone. And then someone also rung our doorbell at 3 a.m. one night, and I went out and like opened my door about 6 inches and I was like, "Hello, can I help you?" And they were like, is this? And they gave some address that wasn't quite ours. And I was like, no, that's not us. And they then went next door and robbed our neighbor at gunpoint.
Oh, no.
So after that, I was like, I'm getting a camera system.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think about Les Miserables, right? And the priest with Jean Valjean who steals the candlesticks, and he says, "Oh, you forgot," and they catch the man, and he says, "Well, you forgot these ones too. You should take them all."
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
the great scene.
so I'm conflicted, right? It's I'm kind of a pacifist because I think Jesus was a pacifist, but my wife always teases me. She's like, "So you're telling me if someone broke into our home, you wouldn't do anything about it?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know how this.
You're like, if you'd make cookies, I would offer them cookies.
I don't know how to balance my
I would
love
happily
for you
give
and my
them
need.
your iPhone. Let's just put it that way.
So these are hard things, right?
Yeah.
How do I balance the fact that, like a lamb before it shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth.
Yeah.
That Jesus and all the apostles apparently sort of went silently and willingly to their own deaths. And yet I've also, I think, been called to protect this family, or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe I haven't been called to protect this family that's been given to me. Maybe I'm called to trust God that he will protect them. I don't know. Now you stirred that all up in me, so thanks for nothing, Dave.
Well, again, my immediate association with Ring and these door cams is that they've just provided so many funny little clips on Instagram.
Oh my
That's like
gosh.
it's just
That is true.
It's such a wealth of ridiculousness and funny things of people playing pranks on those coming up to them, or people catching porch pirates, I guess they're called.
I mean, or just like, I have a friend who has like the worst cat, and his name is Oreo, and they have so much footage of her like running out, like, "Damn it, Oreo!" Because the cat like runs out of the door. Like, it is the highlight when I get an Oreo video.
Damn it, Oreo.
I will say we still have the video clip. My oldest son coming home with a bunch of his high school buddies when they were like freshmen, and one of them had just kissed a girl for the first time, and we like caught the video and audio of them kind of being like, "Oh man, how was it? Oh my gosh, tell me about it. You kissed a girl, woo!" And that's preserved for all time because our camera was set up at our front door.
What I love about this article is that Megan, in her way, she lays out almost like a philosophy of ministry and of Christianity. Because one of the things I didn't read is she says, if you want to use your detective skills, use them to conjecture why the person who you're observing on your camera might be doing something good. Like, maybe that's a house sitter from across the street. Even if it's naive, you sort of you Mr. Magoo it. You ascribe to them. You almost impute to the other person a charitable motive, or at least you use your imagination. I mean, this is an imagination thing that we have no imagination, I think, in our culture today. You use your imagination to think about.
You have plenty of imagination for evil things.
Well, we think about why,
for the good,
or if they are taking something, you think about why it is they might need something like that, or what would have drawn them to this. You use your imagination in those regards, so you impute to other people a sort of a goodness while interrogating yourself and never letting yourself off the hook for your own basic need to control and police everyone around you. And as Sarah, as you said, to sort of drown out sometimes your own self-suspicions. So I think I'm a very strong believer that there's something called healthy self-suspicion. It's not self-loathing. It's not shaming.
Right.
It's just sort of to question myself.
It's called honesty.
But so you're gracious towards other people, and towards yourself, you're slightly, you always you're suspicious. In that you remain on the same, you never sort of put yourself above other people, and I think that that's actually a very healthy, beautiful way to live. And I do think, yes, the bishop in Les Mis. I mean, that is the great archetype of do we actually believe that works? Or do we actually believe that is important? Or is that just, it doesn't have to work, but I'm saying, like, is there,
No.
is that,
I love that. Do we care if it works?
is it simply,
Do we believe that that's how God treats us?
Is that
that's
how
how God treats us? You've stolen from me. Let me give you more.
Oh,
let me love you. Let me show you mercy.
Too much.
RJ, good gosh. Maybe we
Too
should
early in the
record in
morning.
the afternoon.
Throat's closing up. My eyes are watering.
You said, I have a feeling I'm going to listen back to this. I'm going to be like, you sound manic again. But speaking to myself. But it reminds me, Dave, of something Jamie and my just amazing, wonderful marriage therapist said to us, and Sarah, you know her as well, that when you're in your conflict with your spouse, listen to what they're saying and about their pain, and then get curious. Get curious about your spouse, right? If you're going to be a detective, ask the question. So, what was it that happened?
Yeah.
What made it what is it that I said or did that made you feel that way?
Yeah.
What did that get curious?
Yeah.
Because obviously, when you're in a conflict with someone,
Be a goldfish.
that's the last thing you want to do.
Right. You just
What
want to
you
get
wanna do
super
is accuse.
defensive. Yeah.
You just want to get defensive, and you want to
prosecute.
accuse,
Yep.
and you want to talk, and you want to shut down. But if you can get curious, it's just so healing.
Yeah.
And then you can hear them, and you can be empathetic and vulnerable, and it creates space for love to be rekindled. So,
unfortunately, I think that reason, especially once our emotions gets amped up, I think it really is true that reason is really used. It's confirmatory rather than exploratory. But you're saying to use your reason, your mental powers to explore rather than just confirm something you've already decided. That's
So it's
actually
almost like descriptive instead of prescriptive.
there you go. Just laying it all out this morning. Well, this next one really reminds me of R.J. Heyman. It's called "It's Your Friends Who Break Your Heart." It's Your Friends Who Break Your Heart by Jennifer Senior in The Atlantic. It's a long, long article. I think it might be the cover article. And we've talked about friendship quite a bit. I think friendship has been a neglected category, at least it's certainly in the social sciences, but also in various elements of theological, religious circles. But it's getting more and more attention. And this is what she writes. She's 52, and she says, "I've aged out of the friendship collecting business. I should be in the friendship enjoying business, luxuriating in the relationships that survived as I put down roots." She says, "You lose friends to marriage, to parenthood, to politics, even when you share the same politics. In fact, political obsessions are a big, under-discussed friendship ender in my view, and they seem to only deepen with age. You lose friends to success, to failure, to flukish strokes of good luck or ill luck. Envy, dear God, it's the mother of all unspeakables in a friendship, the Lulu of all shames. These life changes and upheavals don't just consume your friends' time and attention. They often reveal unseemly characterological truths about the people you love most, behaviors and traits you previously hadn't imagined possible. Those are brutal. The unhappy truth of the matter is that it is normal for friendships to fade, even under the best of circumstances. The real aberration is keeping them. The percentage of Americans, by the way, I did not know this, who say they don't have a single close friend has quadrupled since 1990, according to a survey.
I totally believe
Survey
that.
Center on American Life. One could argue that modern life conspires against friendship, even if it requires the bonds of friendship all the more. Most friendships die, according to the social psychologist Beverly Fair, not in pyrotechnics, but in a quiet, gray dissolve. It's not that anything happens to either of you. It's just that things stop happening between you. And so you drift. Of course, it's the friendships with the more deliberate endings that torment. At best, those dead friendships merely hurt. At worst, they feel like personal failures, each one amounting to a little divorce. Because by midlife, you've invested enough in your relationships that every loss stings. Mazad Hojat, a social psychology professor at the University of Massachusetts, once told me that people may say that friendship betrayals aren't as bad as romantic betrayals if they're presented with hypothetical scenarios on a questionnaire, but that's not how they experience friendship betrayals in real life. This doesn't surprise me. I still have sense memories of how sickened I was when this friend told me I'd been relegated to a lower league, my heart quickening, the blood thumping in my ears. She goes on. She says, another social scientist told me that during
I'm just sorry. I just have to think of, like, how did that person justify doing that? Like, it's like,
speak the truth in love.
I'm just like, what?
You've been lowered a league to tier C now. You're AAA.
Oh my gosh.
One social scientist, Laura Cartensen, told me during our chat that good friends are for many people a key source of unconditional positive regard. A phrase I keep turning over and over in my head. Her observation perfectly echoed something that Benjamin Taylor said to me when I asked about his close friendship with author Philip Roth. What, I wanted to know, made their relationship work? Taylor said, Philip made me feel that my best self was my real self. I think that's what happens when friendships succeed. The person is giving back to you the feelings you wish you could give to yourself, and seeing the person you wish to be in the world. That's another word for imputation in my world. This is the last part that struck me as very, very germane. Paul Bloom, a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, told me that many years ago he taught a seminar at Yale about the 7 deadly sins. Envy, he said dryly, was the one sin students never boasted about. He's right. With the exception of envy, all of the deadly sins can be pleasurable in some way. Rage can be righteous. Lust can be thrilling. Greed gets you all the good toys. But nothing feels good about envy, nor is there any clear way to slake it. You can work out anger with boxing gloves, sate your gluttony by feasting on a cake, boast your way through cocktail hour, or sleep your way through lunch. But envy, what are you to do with that? Die of it, as the expression goes. A lot in this article. But friendships, middle age, what are they for? Why do they end? How do you guys view this? I mean, I know for a fact we've talked about it before, that we've all had friendships that have been sources of enormous comfort and ones that have ended in, fiery flames.
I mean, I do. So one thing that I miss most about not having my mom here is that she was like a really good friend. She was a really good friend to me, especially as we both aged. I remember she said to me like the year before she died, like, I feel like we finally have a friendship. You're finally old enough for us to have a friendship. And I never got to have this with my mother. And she's gone now, so I lost that pretty quickly. But it was a huge gift to me. But the other thing about my mom was that she told me what she thought about my friends. And she was pretty reserved in that, except there was a friend that she was like, she is not kind to you. And I need to tell you that. And she actually said, your brother and I have both observed, which I was like, oh my God, they're having conversations about me, that she's not kind to you. And this friend and I had a falling out before I lost my parents. And, I have to say that the article highlighting this bit about your friend, like, imputing your best self to you and like loving you wholly and fully and being an encourager is, I think, excellent advice on friendship. And that wasn't really happening. And then, of course, I lost mom and dad, and I kind of didn't go back to that friend. Like, I felt like that was kind of a piece of imparting wisdom that my mother gave me right before she died. And I have been very intentional in the friendships that I have built since then, to really be with people who love me and want goodness for me. And, I'm not saying these are people who are like, like Sarah's personal cheerleader, but that I feel like there's a mutual love and a want for goodness for each other, right? And I think that's not easy, especially in middle age. I do think envy is like a real thing. It's a real poison. But I think the blessing of losing my parents means that I don't actually have time for that. I don't have time for relationships that feel like weirdly one-sided in that way. I don't know. I don't. And maybe that sounds really selfish, but well,
Sarah, but she wrote in another space that like there's of the issue of the sort of problem friend, that people's blood pressure tends to go up much higher in the presence of a problem friend, which some people would call a toxic friend. And then
I hate when we call people toxic.
I know.
But yeah.
I don't either. But than in the presence of basically the person they really hate. Like,
oh my god,
person with whom they have an adverse relationship.
Yeah, because at least in myself, there's a sense of like trying to make them happy or feel okay, whereas like it's just instead of just being in real relationship. So yeah, but the other thing I want to say, and this is a little corrective to the article, but I watched my mom make incredible friends well into her 60s. And they were like my age. Like my mom like had all these like hip young friends that were at her, like her yoga teacher is like my age, and like they like took walks and hung out. So I do think like there's always room for friends like as we age. I don't know. I think that's really short-sighted to be like, oh, I don't have the energy to make real friends anymore. So
all of a sudden, the Golden Girls theme is just running through my head.
Yeah, totally. Like I think of women that like I feel closer to as I age, who I didn't know 10 years ago. Like I think of, for example, Ginger Oaks. You know what I mean? In Charlottesville, like who's a
Ginger.
I mean, there's like these random people that I feel, I don't know. So I think you can always make friends.
What do you think, RJ, as a ex-friend of mine? Can't get enough. Yeah, sorry.
No, do it. Bring it on. It's funny you mentioned Golden Girls because I was thinking, that the television shows that everyone loves, even if they're great or if they're not great, Seinfeld and Friends and How I Met Your Mother and Golden Girls and The Office and Parks and Rec and Brooklyn Nine, whatever it is, they're almost always about a group of friends. People who are in each other's lives sort of unconditionally and always there. Cheers.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. Just these incredible friendships. And yet I feel like the reason those shows are so popular is because so few people have that in their life, have that kind of community of people who are just there no matter what, those kind of deep friendships. I remember Fitz Allison talking about this once at a Mockingbird conference, and he had been asked to give the eulogy or remarks at some man's funeral, and this man had been was a very successful lawyer or something, and Fitz said, "Why are you asking me to do that?" And they said, "Well, you were his best friend."
Oh gosh.
And Fitz said, "I barely knew the man." And how sad that is. And I do wonder, not to make it too kind of gender specific, but I do think, is it harder for men? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe just hard.
Yeah,
okay.
it's harder.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, you can say
You're
that.
kind.
It's harder.
You're kind.
Yeah.
Well, in
That's
middle
why
age,
it was such a miracle that the seven of you all in the same, you're all in the same profession, you're all in your 40s,
Yes.
and you
It's a
go and
miracle.
you hang out and pray together. Like
Yes.
that's an actual documented miracle.
Yeah, I thought the
know?
same thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, what do they say? That the greatest miracle of Jesus' life that no one's talking about is he was a middle-aged man with 12 close friends. Which is totally true. And I'm so, I could almost cry now. I'm so grateful for those guys. And yet, I wish I lived closer to them.
Yeah.
The reality is and this is true for a lot of people now in this modern age that we live, where people move around and change jobs and change neighborhoods and change houses. But it's hard to hold on to friends. And I think I used to carry more guilt than I do about just not being a good friend, because I think I'm like a lot of, maybe more guys are, that I'm a little bit out of sight, out of mind. It's tough to think about people if I don't see them on a regular basis. But I'm also really blessed to have people that I really love and that really love me. And sometimes I'm embarrassed, actually. I'm like, I don't deserve to have a friend like Jonathan Adams, for example, who I think is such a good friend.
He's such a good friend.
And he told me once, I think he said something like, and I'll never forget it, I never told him this, about how his vision of friendship is that if you can show up, you do show up. And so he surprised me for my 40th birthday in Houston, even though he lived in Atlanta. He flew in early, and he was here for my installation as rector. And I was just kind of blown away. And I wish I was that kind of friend. I'm not that kind of friend, but I want to be. And I'm just grateful for the people
I think you're more of that.
that love
I've heard
me
you over
that
the
way.
years say this thing about being out of sight, out of mind. But I mean, we haven't lived in the same place for 12 years, and we're pretty close touch. And I consider
We are. Yeah.
I feel like this is a subject pretty close to my heart, and written a lot about it, especially as it relates to male friendship and the phenomenon of sort of sad clowns, of sort of there was that incredible Saturday Night Live skit with Pete Davidson recently of like all these girls, women dating men who don't have any, who are relying on them too much for relational sort of talking to, so they take them to a man park where like they go and talk about Marvel movies and stuff like that, and because they don't know how to make that. You lose the ability to make friends as a man, and I think a lot of it actually, frankly, does have to do with envy and competition.
Yes,
it's very real, especially once people start getting second homes and they're you can
or
tell.
If you're on the winning side of that, it's like, how do I talk about my actual life with someone that I may not have as much as I do? It's embarrassing. Like, it works both ways. It's not just envy, but it's almost, it can be embarrassment if you're sort of very successful.
No, it's you gravitate towards people who mirror back to you the same choices you've made. I mean, it's slightly a justification thing. It's slightly just a ease and comfort, and like I don't want to have to. I want people that kind of understand me and understand the choices facing me, and it's awkward when I'm with my single friend who's still living month to month and has different things. Like I love that person. I have a deeply, I'm just speaking hypothetically here. I have noticed one of the things she talks about in the article is that there's oftentimes like a power differential in lots of friendships, where this person always needed you and you didn't quite need them. And that's kind of what made it work. And then when they got happy, you sort of didn't know what the relationship was about anymore, or vice versa. I was thinking about a friend of mine who was just going through a tough time for a long time, and then now is going through a very happy time. And that just shifts the dynamic. I think good friendships, really serious friendships, weather that. And the reason while we do make new friends, the reason why I think in older age what I see is people return to their friends of their youth is because these are people you've experienced as somewhat of there's a grace to it. Like they loved you before you had these things, either your terrible humiliations and defeats or your incredible accomplishments and pride. And usually it's some mixture of the two, but you feel that they knew you when, athletes who stick with the people that knew them when they were 13 rather than when they're a multi-gazillionaire. I think that there's something really, because friendship it's an elective situation. I mean, it's unlike a child, or it's
like the most elective situation.
And for that reason,
it's not a marriage.
Yeah.
There's no, I mean, far be it for me to take life advice from Chelsea Handler, but one of my very oldest, dearest friends sent me the little bit that Chelsea Handler had done on a podcast about friendship and about long friendships, and how sometimes returning to those people from childhood can be such a gift, because maybe they weren't with you and this friend was definitely not. We weren't really connected when I was in the life stage of like getting married and having babies, and we actually lead incredibly different lives, right? I'm an Episcopal priest in Texas. She is an actress in LA. She's a devout Jew. We have these very different kind of lives. However, we had such deep connections as children, and part of what Chelsea Handler said that I thought was really insightful was maybe you weren't with each other through these major life things, but this person understands you.
Yeah.
On a level, like when I put up a video of our son singing, the opening little bit for Lessons and Carols, my friend Jill wrote, from her phone in LA, of course he can sing. Because growing up, she'd always seen me sing, and it's just like that kind of deep knowing of each other.
I mean, there's some sense in which you don't, lots of parts of you just never change. I mean, you might become
of course.
sad
and
in a way.
The funny thing is you think they do, and then someone from way back is like, she'll say things like, but you always won things. Like, of course you're doing the death of your parents well, and you're just like, oh my God. Like, I'm so grateful for your voice in my life.
Yeah.
Like, how did I get this again? So,
and anyway, friendship is a fascinating subject. I credit, the way the getting through the pandemic by the friends that I made through exercise here. Like it's just that outlet.
Soapbox.
And it's soapbox is right here. There's a lot to this. and I think we can continue talking about it, but I want to move on to the next thing, which is this amazing article that appeared last week or a couple weeks ago called How Trauma Became the Word of the Decade. How Trauma Became the Word of the Decade. This is by Lexi Pandel in Vox. She says, trauma is very real, but yet some who study trauma say current cultural references to the word have become a mess of tongue-in-cheek and casual mentions, mixed with serious confessions and interrogations of the past, of definitional misunderstandings, and the absurd and the trivial and the profound and the sincere. Trauma, says Michael Shearinga, a medical doctor at Tulane University, is one of those words that can mean anything. I was stuck in traffic. That was traumatic. My football team lost. That was traumatic. That's the way it's used in our culture. Although, they note that it's taken from the Greek word wound, for wound. By the 1990s, terms such as cultural trauma, collective trauma, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma were on the rise, particularly in connection to genocide, enslavement, and war. The expansion of the term, she says basically, this is actually a beautiful thing to see that stuff from the past is very much working its way out in the present. But she says the expansion of the term had an unforeseen side effect. Trauma started to become an easy go-to narrative for all mental health challenges. The trauma narrative became a very easy one to adopt, even for people who didn't have what we would call a lot of trauma. It has currency, says Janice Whitlock, a research scientist at Cornell. It has currency, so people broker in it. One of my participants talked specifically, this is Janice Whitlock speaking, one of the participants in my recent study talked specifically about how she perceived a hierarchy of trauma. There was a sense of the worse your trauma is, the more justified your mental health challenges. By relying on trauma to understand our modern lives, perhaps we're undercutting the very real impacts of stress and overwhelm. We're flattening all hardships, conflating the horrific and life-shattering with the merely unpleasant. What of awareness, though? Doesn't increased visibility push the traumatized to seek help? Perhaps. It does mean in some capacity people are aware that an experience can have negative consequences beyond just feeling bad in the moment. Though it also might be unhealthy for those suffering from trauma to memify their experiences. One expert says, you're no longer processing it, you're just advertising it. Tightening the definition of trauma doesn't take anything away from terrible personal experiences, the horrors of history, or the difficulty of being alive within our current social structures. It doesn't limit our capacity for empathy or undercut the need to recover from tragedy, crises, or challenges. It doesn't ignore the truth of violence and existential horror, though it does recognize that there can be consequences without there necessarily being trauma. I mean, partly this is interesting to me because it highlights the way that we ironically lean on our wounds, that which hurts us, to feel better about ourselves. And yet I always wonder when we talk about the expansion of the word trauma, we want to reserve it for these terrible, terrible things that have happened and not for everyday occurrences. I get that, but I also wonder if the real truth is simply that everyone is traumatized. Like it's just trauma is another word for woundedness is another word for being alive. Like the walking wounded is something that I see around me. I know the dangers, and Sarah, you've certainly talked about this in past episodes of comparative trauma and competitive trauma even, and I see that especially in certain cultural discourses, and yet. Just because something's widespread doesn't make it less acute, Anyway, I'm interested to hear what you guys think, because this is I do hear this word all the time, and I use it all the time, and I'm recognizing it's like, was that just an awful thing that happened, or was that truly traumatizing? Was that wounding in a way that's permanent and sort of But of course, I also have a theology that tells me that Jesus is a wounded healer, and that out of your wounds, that's where your power is. That's where the grace often flows. The light, those wounds are where the light gets in. All that theology of the cross.
In weakness, my power is made perfect.
Yeah. Well, RJ, let's hear from you.
It feels like a cry for mercy. That I think we live in a very unmerciful culture where it doesn't, I think about what we talked about last week with, Sarah living in the Delta and agricultural settings where there's times where things grow and there's times when things get harvested, and then there's a time when things lay fallow, when life lays fallow, and how that's not something that you're never allowed to lay fallow. You always have to be going. You always have to, it doesn't matter what you've been through. Just you have to go, 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 go. And it reminds me also of the article we read maybe a year ago about the nervous breakdown. How it used to be okay to have a nervous breakdown and just kind of check out from life for a few months at a time, and how it was just very vague. It wasn't specific, and it doesn't seem like it's okay to do that anymore. And so maybe the only way that people can find the mercy and the rest that they're looking for is by voicing this pain that they have, and having other people kind of hear that or affirm that. Because as we also know, there is something incredibly healing about just being heard.
Yeah.
That when you've suffered something, when you've been through something and it's running through your mind, and you've been dealing with it for weeks or months or years, just to be able to verbalize that to someone else who will listen to you and sort of love you in that way, to allow you to vent, to sort of, vomit your trauma, your pain onto them, suddenly you feel a little bit better. And so maybe that's where this is coming from, is people just needing to be heard, and not feeling like there's really space in their lives to process this, or to find rest. People are looking for rest and for mercy. So and of course there's also, self-justification. Look at me, I'm important. My pain is bigger than your pain, or I don't know. There's always comparison games. But I do think people carry a lot of pain.
What do you think?
And loneliness. And it's been,
Sarah, what are you with this?
Sarah, what do you think?
I don't want to sound like an asshat. I do wonder with the word trauma, and also I would also lump PTSD in here, how it affects our people who have served in the military and war. When we are like very casually like trauma, I have PTSD, and maybe that's just because I have family, like I've always had generations of family who've served, and so I always think of them. Honestly, it also makes me, this is the other reason I feel guilty saying this out loud, but it also makes me think of that book I've talked about here, the Other Side of Sadness, by George Bonanno, because he actually talks about there's a lot of research about society post 9/11, or I think there's some sort of, oh gosh, I'm not going to get it right, some sort of atomic meltdown, something else that happened, and they study the populations a month out, 6 weeks out, and what they see is people actually aren't that traumatized. That people are actually incredibly resilient, and that there is woundedness there, but it in a classical definition of trauma in sort of the psychological realm, that's not the right word. Yeah, I guess the word trauma makes me a little uncomfortable, I'll be honest, to use it casually. And and maybe that's judgmental, but I just, when and I know comparative suffering and all that, but when I think about children who are raised in traumatizing households, that's very different than me sitting in traffic, and we have this sort of cultural tendency right now to take, and maybe we've always had it, I don't know linguistics, but we take words that have a lot of meaning and then we make them funny. And I don't know what that's about. It kind of, it reminds me a little bit of the word blessed. How people say that they're blessed, in a funny, ironic way, but also, and I hate when people do this, and it's a very Southern thing, but when people think someone is stupid or whatever, they think poorly of someone and they're like, oh, bless. I I don't like that at all. And so there's like a weird thing for me with words that get misused. And it's probably just me like being like a pent-up English teacher. But and I just get to justify it by being self-righteous about not using the word trauma. I mean, I've certainly used the word, right?
I remember, I forget if we talked about it here, but Esther Perel, the therapist, was saying that the use of words like trauma is actually an indication of the tyranny of positivity in our culture. That the only way to talk about negative emotions or negative experiences is to pathologize them, using words like trauma is a medical term. And I can't just say I'm inexplicably depressed. I have to say that I'm, or I can say I'm clinically depressed, or I can say that I'm, pathologically depressed, or you can say, I didn't just have a tough childhood. You say I was trauma. It's trauma, and so in that sense, I think it can be seen as an indication, certainly as an invitation to compassion, but it's not seen as normal to be regretful.
A person.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah, it's like, who had a happy childhood?
It's aberrant. It's aberrant to have had a wounding experience, and so the only way we can get away with it, the only way people won't question it, is to say, well, it's trauma. It's trauma. It's a permission thing, I think.
Yeah.
And there is semantics to it, which is.
And there's nothing wrong with. I mean, like people need that. I don't mean to take that away, but it's a word that carries more weight for me than it used to.
Right.
I think.
No, sure, because you don't want to make people feel self-conscious when they're talking about their pain. Oh, I'm using the wrong words for it now. Am I going to be judged for it? But because it's a way of actually trying not to be judged for it.
Right.
I think because as RJ says, there's so little mercy.
Yeah.
RJ.
I was talking with a friend recently who had listened to the Mars Hill podcast, which we've referenced a little bit.
And Dave was on. Okay.
And Dave was on.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mars
kind of a big deal.
Podcast featured Dave Zoll. You are kind of a big deal.
Just kind of. Okay.
But this friend had worked in a similarly dysfunctional church and been wounded, and he was saying it. I think, he used the phrase PTSD. He was like, listen to Mars Hill, it gave me a little PTSD or brought up memories of what I'd been through. And I recognized myself like getting sad and angry and my temperature rising just as I'm hearing a story very similar to mine. But then he was sharing that with an older priest, kind of a mentor friend of his, who actually had been a Vietnam vet and had diagnosable PTSD from Vietnam. And he caught himself using the term PTSD because he's like, oh, wait, but I know it's not really, he felt bad. He's like, it's not like I have PTSD like, you do. And this older priest, Vietnam vet friend said, no, don't do that. Oh. Like, you absolutely have PTSD. Gosh. Like, I know what you went through. I know the pain that was and what that did to you. And so it's completely appropriate to use that term.
You forgot the candlesticks.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
And maybe that older friend was just trying to make him feel
but
good.
Like,
I don't know.
Who cares?
If you want to,
but I wonder how many of us do have that thing that happened in our lives.
Yeah.
That's just really hard to get over. Yeah. And you're always thinking about it, and you recognize again, another word, it's big in our culture right now, how you get triggered when someone says something or does something, or you hear a story and suddenly you're like, why am I so angry?
Yeah.
Why am I so anxious? Why am I so sad? Why am I not sleeping as well as I used to? And if that's what you're going through, then I don't know, trauma might not be a bad word. I mean, I know what you meant trivializing it, but I do think a lot of people carry
certainly
things around like that.
The church has genuinely, not just in a sort of they had a bad youth group experience. The church, people have had very traumatic experiences, and it doesn't always look like actual, child abuse or something like that. It is. I noticed the same thing.
Honestly, it's just like a really, really destructive sermon. I mean, like it's funny. People are so vulnerable in the space of church. It doesn't take much to traumatize people.
Well, it goes back to the friendship thing.
Yeah.
We build these friendships in churches, either real or implied, and then when someone at church hurts us, it feels like a massive betrayal.
Yeah.
You know, you open
Absolutely.
yourself up.
Yes.
You know, you think you have the.
But people
anyway,
might think, oh, it's patronizing to dismiss the enormous criticism or deconstruction that in the relation that results or is on the other side of these terrible church dramas and religious scandals. But the truth is, It does help me, compassionate, as someone who is still engaged in Christian work and very much views the gospel as good news. It helps me to say, you know what? This is people who are experiencing genuine trauma. Like that's, I can hear their intellectual arguments. I can hear they're trotting out their evidence. But what I'm all really hearing is a lot of trauma and a lot of pain. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
A lot of pain doesn't seem to really go anywhere. But there's a really, I want to end with something where we saw a different or a very Christian way of looking at trauma. And this was from Stephen Colbert. This is a piece, this is a clip that's been passed all over the internet. Dua Lipa, this English singer, decided to turn the tables on Colbert.
I love Dua Lipa.
It's funny, it's like Colbert, especially after he stopped the Colbert Report, there's been times where you're like, oh, I miss the old Colbert. Like he's so partisan and so one note sometimes. But then every few months he drops some insane bomb of
Every
profundity.
few months he turns out he's a Christian.
Yeah, like a huge. And just this is such a gift that he gave the entire world, and especially those of us who care about what it looks like to be a witness or at least a presence in the public square. So Dua Lipa turns the tables on him, and she says, I think something that your viewers really connect with in your comedy and your hosting skills, especially in the past few years, is how open and honest and authentic you are about the role your faith plays in your life. Do your faith and your comedy ever overlap, and does one ever win out? Now, Colbert speaks so quickly that I'm going to read what he says a little more slowly. He says, I think ultimately all of us being mortal, the faith will win out in the end. But I certainly hope when I get to heaven, Jesus has a sense of humor. But I'll say this. Someone was asking me early about what and this relates to faith because my faith is involved. I'm a Christian and a Catholic. And it's always connected to the idea of love and sacrifice being somewhat related, and giving yourself to other people, and that death is not defeat, if you could see where I'm getting at there. Someone was asking me earlier, what movie did I enjoy this year? And I said I really liked Belfast, which is Kenneth Branagh's story of his childhood. And one of the reasons I love it is I'm Irish American, and it's such an Irish movie. And I think this is also a Catholic thing, because it's funny and it's sad, and it's funny about being sad. In the same way that sadness is like a little bit of an emotional death, but not a defeat, if you can find a way to laugh about it. Because the laughter keeps you from having fear of it, and fear is the thing that keeps you turning to evil devices to save you from the sadness. As Robert Hayden said, we must not be frightened or cajoled into accepting evil as our deliverance from evil. We must keep struggling to maintain our humanity, though monsters of abstraction threaten and police us. So if there's some relationship between my faith and my comedy, it's that no matter what happens, you are never defeated. You must understand and see this in the light of eternity and find some way to love and laugh with each other. And Dua Lipa says, ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Colbert. And he just rattles this off, by the way, about 3 times faster.
It's
crazy. Than what I've said.
Unbelievable. It's crazy.
Well, my response was just like, thank you, Stephen, and how this was just at his...
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus, at his fingertips.
Yeah.
To say that...
I mean, clearly he thinks about this all the time.
Yes. To acknowledge the deep sadness and pain of life, and yet it is not the final word. That's what he's saying. Anyway, what do you guys think?
A small death, but not a... Sadness is like a small death, but it's not a defeat. And also how evil cannot be the answer to evil. And that's so powerful because even just all the ways that we try to mitigate our sadness, that we from, picking up your phone to having one too many drinks to yelling at your kids to, just trying to find a moment of relief from the unrelenting sadness, and him being like, that can't be the answer. Better to laugh at yourself and to laugh at the world and to laugh, because it's not the end. That there's something more and greater and someone out there who loves you, looking out for you. It's so good. It's unbelievable. Sarah, you want to say something?
I can't. It's just so good. I mean, and he's an expert on this, right? Like, he lost his father and his siblings in a plane crash when he was little. Like, it's just like he has lived this life. And like, the thing about like not fixing our evil with evil has been such a profound theme in my life this year. Like, it's been the greatest, literally the greatest gift of my faith. Like, because I think I really would have gone to a much darker, much angrier place. And like, the reality is that like, that's just not going to serve me at all. And like, going to be horrible for like my children and my husband and me, and all I keep thinking of is like, I'm sorry, this whole episode is about the accident. It's such on my brain right now, but my aunt, we were at my parents' house. My whole family had gathered, just such beauty and love in their home. And my aunt and I were in the back bedroom, and she's trying to like tell me, it's like they were so careful about like how much I would know about the accident and how much they would keep from me, my family, because they just knew it would be so hard, right? And there was like a deep sense of like specifically protecting me. Like, even my brother was like, we have to protect Sarah. Like, this is a lot for her. She's got kids she's raising, right? And my aunt is back in the bedroom, and she's trying to talk me through like what we know about their last moments. And I have this uncle who would not listen to this podcast, so I'm not worried about it. Uncle Donnie, who is a little kooky, and he loves gadgets, and he kept turning on the robot vacuum, and it just kept going down the hallway with the wooden floors and like running into the door where my Aunt Becky is like trying to have this like really sad, hard conversation with me. And it's so funny. And she's like, damn it, Donnie, and it just is like the humor was what saved us all. It saved me, but it was like,
totally.
It would feel like we were drowning. And then the laughter would just, you were almost like a whale, right? You would be underwater. And then it would like let you come up for air for a minute. And you think, okay, I can go back down. Like, that's what the humor was. It was so life-giving. So I just...
That is such a funny image, Sarah. I don't know what...
Damn it, Donnie.
Donnie is just
Big Lebowski.
I mean, Donnie, I've seen Donnie drive around the town of Rosedale before on a lawnmower as though most people drive around on golf carts. Like, he's one of my favorite people. So
it reminded me a little bit of like when people delve into the tradition of Jewish comedy. Because that is basically the strongest comedic tradition.
Yes.
It sounds a bit like the Irish version here, but we always say our humor is what got us through. And so many of my favorite, things that I laugh about the most, basically most emanate from Larry David. His and Seinfeld and that whole universe of things. I just can't. It has brought me so much joy. And one of the things they're doing is they're both they constantly are exposing the low anthropology, the ridiculousness of human beings, and then they're laughing at it. Now, they may not understand it in this sort of like metaphysical way that Colbert is saying, like, we are not defeated, but we're part of the same tradition. And that humor as a way of coping, I think I know it can be a way to deflect. It can be a way to sort of ignore trauma, but it can also be a way to state that my trauma, my wounds, my sadness does not have the final say. And to laugh it is a release valve. It's also sort of a hilarity. You could say that God has the last laugh. But one of the things...
I think deflective humor is not funny.
Deflective humor is not funny. And I don't...
I think you can tell the difference.
I think misanthropic humor can be fun. Like when you're really meanly making fun of someone, I think it can be funny, but ultimately it doesn't have nothing of this sort of redemptive quality to it. I like to think that if there's anything different about Christian comedy, it would be that you're never placing yourself above. Auden, I think, says that no one is immune from comic exposure, that we're all sort of, we're not laughing at people, we're sort of laughing with them. I think that that's a powerful thing. It's one of the things I always love about Robert Capon is he always seems to be, he emphasizes humor as an attribute of the sort of playful, spirit-filled life. And, one of the great things about humor is that it's often, or laughter at least, it's reflexive. It's not calculated. It drags you into the moment. It takes you, you're not in control of it. And I think that there's something deeply gracious about that. It overwhelms you in a way. You're not cooperating with humor. People would say, "Oh, don't laugh at that," but they're only saying that because you are laughing at something that maybe you shouldn't laugh at.
They're saying that because it's
touching you where you actually are, not like who you think you should be or what you think is supposed to be funny. This is why, I think humor is a great subject, and for Colbert to take humor seriously in this way is and to point out what allows it not to be nihilism, but for Colbert to say no, it's a way of saying that sadness, if the finality, tragedy is not the final thing. To laugh is an act of hope. I don't know. That's where my mind went with it.
I think it's also why I think we as Christians, some Christians are very nervous about Halloween, but I don't think we need to be, because it's All Hallows Eve. It's on the day before All Saints Day, when we celebrate that by the grace of God we're saints and we'll enjoy life together forever with Him. But we're gonna die, and that's gonna happen, and life can be scary, but we can kind of have fun with it a little bit and kind of laugh at the principalities and powers or whatever. And Colbert it made me think of that passage in Peter, I can't remember, 1st or 2nd Peter, where he says, always be prepared to give an answer for those who ask about the hope that is within you, but do so with gentleness and keeping a clear conscience, so that you cause no offense. That he was, and that's a little too, I don't think he thought he was going to get that question. I don't think he was prepared, but it's so clear that his life has prepared him. His faith has prepared him, and then also what Jesus says to the disciples, when they drag you before the courts to give an answer, don't worry, because the Spirit will give you the words to say at that moment. And it was just so clear, crystal, 100% clear that the Holy Spirit was talking through Stephen Colbert at that moment, to her and to kind of all of us. Right?
RJ,
it was a miracle. It was a miracle.
It was. I love the way you say the word miracle.
How do I say miracle?
Miracle.
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 I just always, I have to say, I feel like I have my Mimo on the podcast sometimes, because you just throw out those New Testament verses, and I'm like, oh my god!
Got to keep us on the Bible.
Someone's
a little
a rector.
Bit. Come on.
I love it.
It's beautiful. Well, let's end there. This is a wonderful reminder. I think praise God for that little exchange and the.
Laugh at your trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you
find something funny.
We'll talk to you both of you guys in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
God bless you both. Keep on laughing. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord.